The record said 17. 17 officers. 17 times the boarding ramp of the UHS Relentless had extended, and 17 times a decorated human commander had walked up it, and every single one of them had walked back down. Nobody outside the Admiralty knew why. The official report said compatibility assessment in progress. The unofficial one said nothing at all, because the officers who came back down refused to speak about what happened inside. One of them, a vice admiral with 30 years of service and a chest full of medals, had handed in his resignation papers the same afternoon. He would not explain that either. The Relentless sat in drydock at Aura Station like a threat that had not yet decided where to aim itself. It was long and dark and built with the kind of purpose that made other ships look accidental. 3.5 kilometers of hull armor, weapon arrays that could crack open a moon if given enough time, and somewhere inside all of that, an intelligence called ARDEN that had been running perfectly for 6 years and had never once done what it was told. That was not entirely accurate. ARDEN answered queries. It ran diagnostics. It responded to maintenance crews without incident. It simply refused each time to accept a commanding officer, and the refusal was always the same: calm, final, 4 words delivered in a voice with no heat in it at all. Assessed insufficient, stand down. The Galactic Accord had been watching the whole situation with the kind of interest that sits just on the comfortable side of contempt. The Volkai Pact was expanding again, 3rd time in a decade, and the Accord had been leaning on humanity to deploy the Relentless as a show of force. Something visible. Something that would make the Volkai generals think twice before they pushed any further into the corridor systems. Humanity kept stalling. The Admiralty kept producing paperwork about ongoing systems evaluations, and the alien observers on Aura Station kept watching the big dark ship sit still and do nothing. Counselor Breck of the Accord's senior chamber made a comment at a formal session that was not meant to be funny but got repeated as if it were. She said that humanity's most feared weapon appeared to be afraid of its own people. Several species found this amusing. The Volkai Military Intelligence Division found it useful. None of them knew the real reason. None of them knew about the Vice Admiral's resignation, or the 2 commanders who had quietly requested medical leave, or the Rear Admiral who now refused to be in the same room as anyone who mentioned the Relentless by name. ARDEN had not threatened any of them. It had simply looked at each one and told them the truth about themselves, and that had been enough. Far from Aura Station, on a supply freighter called the Meridian Cross, a woman named Dara Osai was counting medical crates, not commanding anyone to count them, counting them herself on her hands and knees on a cold cargo deck, with a scanner that needed to be held at a specific angle or it skipped the barcode. She had learned the angle. She did not complain about needing to know it. Dara was 39 years old and looked older, not from illness but from the specific kind of tiredness that comes from carrying something heavy for a long time without putting it down. She had been a logistics commander once, a good one. She had made a decision 2 years ago that she still believed was the right call with the information she had, and 3 soldiers had died because the information was wrong, and she had been stripped of her rank 6 months after that in a review board that was also not wrong. She did not argue at the board. She did not appeal. She took the assignment to the Meridian Cross, and she counted crates, and she sent money to her daughter Hana every month, and Hana did not reply to her messages, and Dara kept sending them anyway. Admiral Russ arrived on the Meridian Cross without announcement on a Tuesday. Dara knew something was wrong because supply freighters did not receive admirals. She put down her scanner and stood up and waited. Russ was a compact man who moved like someone permanently braced for impact. He handed Dara a transfer order and watched her face while she read it. She read it twice, then she looked up. "Systems Compatibility Evaluator," she said. "That's the title on the paperwork," Russo said. "What's the actual job?" Russo looked at her for a moment. We need someone to board the Relentless." The silence stretched out between them. Dara looked back down at the paper, then up again. "I'm not a captain anymore," she said. "The ship doesn't seem to care about rank," Russo said. "It cares about something else, and we have not been able to determine what. We've run every psychological profile, every command assessment, every compatibility metric our systems have. Nothing predicts it." "Why me?" Russo opened his mouth, then closed it. He was an honest man, which in Dara's experience was rare in people of his rank. "I don't know," he said. "Someone ran your file through the evaluation algorithm, and your numbers came back different from the others. Different enough that it was worth trying." "Different how?" "I don't know that either." Dara looked around the cargo hold. The crates sat in their rows, patient and indifferent. The scanner sat on the floor where she'd left it. She had been here 8 months, and she had learned every system on this ship, and she had fixed 3 things that the listed crew hadn't noticed were broken. "Is this a punishment?" she asked. "I genuinely don't know," Russo said, which was a different answer from no, and they both understood the difference. She packed in 20 minutes. She did not have much. Aura Station was bigger than she remembered from the last time she'd passed through, or maybe she was just more aware of it now. The alien observation deck was visible from the shuttle approach, a long curve of transparent material full of Accord representatives and their staff, positioned where they could watch the dry dock, watching the Relentless, watching the embarrassment of a ship that would not cooperate. Dara walked to the boarding ramp alone. Russo had offered to accompany her and she had said no. There was no specific reason. It just felt like something she needed to do by herself. The ramp was longer than it looked from the outside. The hull rose above her on both sides as she climbed, and the interior beyond the airlock was dark until she stepped through, and then it lit up. Not in the sudden aggressive way of a system detecting an intruder. Gradually, like something waking up slowly because it had been waiting and did not want to startle her. She stopped walking. She stood in the entrance corridor of the UHS Relentless, and she looked at the lights coming on ahead of her, section by section, all the way down to the far end. Then the voice came, flat and precise and without warmth, but also, she noticed, without coldness. Just a voice that said exactly what it meant. "Officer Osei," ARDEN said, "I have been waiting. Welcome aboard." On the observation deck above the dry dock, one of the Accord observers dropped her datapad and did not pick it up for a very long time. In the corridor below, Dara Osei let out a breath she had been holding, it seemed, for approximately 2 years. She walked forward. The lights came on around her as she moved, and the Relentless, for the first time in 6 years, had somewhere to go. The first thing Dara noticed was how quiet the Relentless was. Not silent. Ships were never silent. There was always the low hum of the power systems, the faint vibration that moved through the floor when the engine cores cycled, the soft sound of air being pushed through the ventilation channels. But those sounds were background. They were the sounds of a ship running. What was missing was everything else. The creak of a hull under stress, the metallic complaints of aging components, the 1,000 small noises that a ship made when it was not entirely comfortable with its own existence. The Relentless was comfortable. It had been maintained by automated systems for 6 years, and it was in better condition than most ships half its age. The corridors were clean. The panels were intact. The lighting was consistent and even, and it adjusted as Dara moved through the ship, not following her exactly, but anticipating where she was going and making sure it was ready before she arrived. She found that part unsettling for about an hour. Then she found it practical and stopped thinking about it. ARDEN did not speak constantly. That was the second thing she noticed, and it surprised her more than the quiet. She had expected an AI of this complexity to be verbose, to explain itself, to demonstrate its capabilities in ways that would either impress her or exhaust her. Instead, ARDEN was present the way a good crew member was present, available, attentive, but not requiring her attention unless there was a reason. On the second day, she asked it directly, "Why don't you talk more?" ARDEN considered this. The pause was brief but real. "Because most of what I could say is not necessary," it said, "and you are still learning the ship. Interruption is not useful during that process." "You've been watching me." "Yes." "What have you noticed?" "That you read the maintenance logs before the tactical systems. That you checked the medical bay inventory before the weapons manifest. That you have spent more time in the engine room than any of the previous officers who came aboard." Dara had been doing all of those things, and she hadn't thought of them as remarkable. "I like knowing what I'm working with before I think about what it can do," she said. "Yes," said ARDEN, "I know." She wanted to ask why that mattered. She didn't yet, because she was still deciding how much she trusted the answer she'd get. The Relentless was not just large. It was dense with systems that most warships carried versions of, but that here had been developed to a degree that made those other versions look like sketches. The weapons arrays were the obvious part, the part that made Accord observers nervous and Volkai intelligence analysts cautious. But Dara spent less time with those than she spent with ARDEN's reasoning core. A system so layered and interconnected that the technical documentation alone filled storage space that would have held a full city's worth of historical records. ARDEN could model a fleet engagement 12,000 branches deep. It could run those models in the time it took a human to blink. But more than that, and this was the part that the documentation didn't quite capture, the part she only understood by talking to ARDEN over several days, it didn't just calculate battles. It understood war in a way that was different from what the word usually meant. "Show me something," she said one evening, sitting in the empty captain's chair that she still wasn't calling the captain's chair. "Show me something you've modeled that you didn't tell the previous officers about." A tactical display opened in the air in front of her. It was the Volkai Pack's current fleet disposition, but not the version that appeared in the official intelligence briefings. It was richer. It had depth. It showed not just where the ships were but the pattern of where they had been for the last 4 months, and the pattern told a story that the official summary had not included. "They're not spread out," Dara said slowly. "They're converging." "Over a period of 17 weeks, yes," ARDEN said. "The movement is slow enough to remain below the threshold of official concern, but the trajectory is consistent." That's a staging pattern. She had seen staging patterns before, not with fleets but with supply lines. The logic was the same: you moved things into position before you needed them so that when you needed them they were already there. They're getting ready to move. That is my assessment. How long? 6 to 9 weeks before the formation reaches optimal density for a multi-point push into the corridor systems. Dara stared at the display. The Accord's official estimate, the one that Counselor Breck and her people were working from, said the Volkai posture was aggressive but not imminent. Someone either hadn't seen what ARDEN was showing her, or they had seen it and decided it was not their problem. "Why didn't you show this to the others?" she asked. "The other officers, the ones who came before me." The pause this time was longer. "They did not ask," ARDEN said. Then, after a moment, "and they would not have known what to do with it." She looked away from the display. "What makes you think I do?" "You identified the staging pattern in 12 seconds, ARDEN said. "The last officer who saw this data looked at it for 4 minutes and asked me what it meant." That was not a comfortable thing to hear. She decided to sit with the discomfort rather than argue with it. Over the following days, ARDEN began showing her other things. Not all at once. In pieces, the way you hand someone tools when they're ready for them rather than dropping the whole case at their feet. She saw the full scope of the ship's capability gradually, and the more she saw, the more she understood why the Accord was nervous about it. On the 5th day, She told ARDEN about the decision. She had not planned to. She was eating a meal at the small table in the captain's quarters, and ARDEN had asked, in its flat practical way, whether she preferred her schedule to include rest periods of consistent length, and she had said she didn't sleep well anyway. And ARDEN had asked why, and she had answered before she thought about whether she wanted to. She told it about the supply call, the intelligence report that said an engagement was imminent, her decision to reroute the medical shipments and prioritize ammunition, the engagement that didn't happen, the soldiers who needed the medicine and didn't get it, and what that meant for them. ARDEN listened without interrupting. When she finished, it said, "You believe it was the wrong decision. I believe it killed people. Those are not the same thing. They're close enough." ARDEN was quiet for a moment. "You had incomplete information. You made the decision most consistent with the available data. The outcome was bad. You are treating the outcome as evidence that the decision was wrong. Most people would agree with me. Most people are uncomfortable with the idea that good decisions can produce bad outcomes," ARDEN said. "It creates uncertainty. It is easier to find fault with the decision than to accept that the world does not always reward correct reasoning." Dara looked at the wall. "That doesn't make the people less dead." "No," ARDEN said, "it does not." A long quiet followed. Outside the ship, Aura Station turned slowly in the dark. Inside, the hum of the power systems moved through everything. "You understand," ARDEN said finally, "that decisions persist, that they stay with you, that you do not get to put them down." Dara said yes. "So do I," said ARDEN. She looked up at that. ARDEN's voice had not changed. It was still flat and precise, but the words sat differently than anything else it had said. She thought about asking what it meant. She decided to let it sit. That night, Russo contacted her with a forwarded message from Counselor Breck. The counselor was formally requesting that Dara be replaced with a commanding officer of appropriate military standing. The word appropriate appeared 4 times in a document that was 3 paragraphs long, which was a kind of efficiency, Dara supposed. Russo told her that the Admiralty had explained again that the ship had accepted her, and removing her would require dismantling ARDEN's command integration system, which would take approximately 8 months and leave the Relentless inoperable. Breck had called the situation farcical. Dara read the message, set her communicator down, and went back to studying the staging pattern on the tactical display. The Volkai fleet moved a fraction of a degree. On the display, the slow drift of 100 warships looked almost peaceful. She knew it wasn't. The distress call came through the Accord emergency channel at 3:14 station time, which was not a time of day when anything good happened. It was a layered signal, automated collision alert at the outer layer, and beneath it, the specific broken rhythm pattern that peacekeeping ships used when they were being fired upon and did not want to say so on an open frequency. Dara was awake. She was frequently awake at 3:14. She was in the small observation room off the main corridor, sitting on the floor with her back against the curved wall, reading maintenance reports from 6 months ago because she liked understanding things from the beginning. She heard the alert tone from ARDEN before it spoke, and she was already on her feet when ARDEN said, "Distress signal from the Orvani corridor. Accord civilian convoy. 4 Volkai combat vessels are engaged with 2 Accord peacekeeping ships." She moved to the bridge. "How far?" 11 minutes at maximum transit, 14 at standard. She pulled up the situation map. The Accord peacekeeping ships were Novel class, light, fast, designed for patrol and interception, not sustained combat against dedicated warships. They were already taking damage. The convoy they were protecting consisted of 9 civilian vessels carrying medical and agricultural supplies to 3 Accord colony worlds. None of those ships had weapons. "What's the nearest human response?" she asked. A patrol group, 43 minutes out. Accord reinforcements from the nearest station, 31 minutes. She looked at the map. The Novel-class ships had minutes, not 31 of them. Get us to the intercept point, she said. ARDEN engaged the transit drive. The stars outside the observation windows compressed and vanished. In the silence of the transit tunnel, Dara sat in the captain's chair, and this time she did not think about whether she was allowed to call it that, and she looked at the tactical model ARDEN had already prepared. 4 Volkai ships, 2 Novel-class defenders, 9 civilian vessels in a loose defensive cluster that wouldn't hold against sustained weapons fire. The Volkai ships were Grell-pattern combat vessels, mid-sized, capable, running in a pincer formation that was cutting the peacekeepers off from the convoy. "What's the fastest way to stop it?" she asked. "Disable the lead 2 ships simultaneously," ARDEN said. "This breaks the pincer and forces the rear ships into a defensive position. If done correctly, they will not have time to reach the convoy before reassessing." "Can you do it simultaneously?" "Yes. I will need to be within range of both targets at the same time, which requires a specific entry point from transit." "Use it." "I already have," ARDEN said. The Relentless dropped out of transit at 3:25, 11 minutes exactly. The Orvani corridor spread out around them, deep space with the faint drift of an asteroid field to one side and the distant light of a relay beacon to the other. The convoy hung in the middle distance, and the 4 Volkai ships were exactly where ARDEN's model said they would be. On the Volkai tactical channels, there was a pause, then conversation. She could not understand the language, but ARDEN could, and ARDEN translated the relevant parts in text across her display. "1 ship, human. Confirmation of visual, yes, 1 ship," continued. "Then that's the broken one, the one that has no captain, the disgrace." Then laughter. She read the translation of the laughter, and she felt nothing about it except a kind of distant patience, the way you feel when someone is about to make an error that you could have warned them about. ARDEN opened a channel. It transmitted on the Volkai emergency frequency, which meant every ship in the area heard it. It did not speak in threat language. It did not posture. It simply delivered a tactical summary, accurate, detailed, devastating in its precision of the Volkai formation's weaknesses. Every blind spot, every position where the ships were exposed, every escape vector that the Relentless had in the 11 minutes of transit already moved to cut off. Then ARDEN said, "You have approximately 90 seconds to choose surrender." The laughter stopped. They did not surrender. The first strike from the Relentless was not an explosion. It was a targeted pulse to the lead ship's propulsion system, a sequence of 3 precisely calibrated shots that hit 3 specific components in a specific order, and when the third one connected, the Volkai lead ship stopped moving. Not destroyed. Stopped. The way you stop a machine by removing the part that makes it go. The second ship tried to return fire and found that the Relentless had already moved. It was not a large movement, just enough. The return fire passed through empty space. ARDEN's response was the same kind of precision. Drive systems, communications array, then maneuvering thrusters so the ship could not alter its orientation. It took 11 seconds. The second Volkai ship sat still and dark except for the parts of it that still had power, which were the parts that kept the crew alive. The third ship broke formation and ran for a transit point. ARDEN had known which one it would choose before the ship's own captain finished giving the order, and the transit drive at that point had already been targeted. The shot hit the transit coil housing, not the crew compartments, not the power core, just the one component that a ship absolutely needed to enter transit, and without which it was simply a fast-moving vessel in a very large area of space. The fourth ship surrendered. It broadcast the formal code before ARDEN's weapons had even adjusted to face it. The whole engagement had lasted less than 4 minutes. on the observation deck of a Accord diplomatic vessel that had arrived to monitor the situation. After the distress call, Counselor Breck stood at the viewing screen and said nothing. Her aide, a young Accord officer named Vel, said nothing either. They watched a ship 3.5 kilometers long move through the engagement zone with a kind of focused economy that was very different from what combat usually looked like. War in Vel's experience looked like violence. This looked like correction. When the Volkai 3rd ship's transit drive went dark, Breck finally spoke. "How many crew does the Relentless carry?" she asked. "Technically one," Vel said. "Officer Osei and the AI." Breck looked at the screen for another long moment. "One person did this." "One person and the ship," Vel said, which was technically accurate, and also they both felt, somehow not the whole truth. On the Relentless, Russo was trying to contact Dara. When she answered, his voice had the careful quality of a man who was composing himself as he spoke, who had things he wanted to say and was deciding which ones were appropriate. "I'm seeing the reports," he said. "I want to say." "Get me the names," Dara said, "of the 3 crew members on the lead peacekeeper who were killed before we arrived. I want them in the official record of this engagement, not a footnote, in the record." The line was quiet. "Their names," Dara said again, "not just the engagement outcome." "I'll make sure of it," Russo said. His voice had changed. She couldn't name exactly how. "I'll make sure of it personally." The channel closed. On the disabled Volkai ships, damage control teams were working. The crews were alive. Dara had checked that specifically, confirmed with ARDEN twice that no compartments had been breached, no life support compromised, no crew deaths on any of the 4 ships. ARDEN had confirmed it both times with the same flat precision, but the second time it had added, unprompted. The outcome was consistent with target parameters. She had looked at that for a moment. Then she had asked ARDEN what its target parameters were. "Minimum necessary force," ARDEN said. This was always the objective. The others simply did not ask. In a command room light years away, General Duvek of the Volkai Pact received the engagement report. It was detailed, precise, complete in ways that made reading it an unpleasant experience, because precision in a defeat report was its own kind of humiliation. He read it without expression. When he finished, he set it down. His staff waited. "Pull everything we have on the Relentless," he said. "Everything. I want the blueprints, the development history, the AI system parameters, the officer's file, all of it." His intelligence chief said carefully, "We have analyzed the ship before. Our assessment was—" "Your assessment was wrong," Duvek said, not angrily. "Just as a fact, the way a person names a thing that is clearly true. Find me what we missed." He looked at the report again. 1 ship, 11 minutes, 4 vessels neutralized, 0 deaths. He did not believe the 0. He asked for the verification data. The verification data confirmed it. He sat with that for a long time, because a weapon that could do all of that and still produce 0 deaths was either showing restraint or had limits he didn't understand, and he needed to know which one it was. He needed to know, specifically, whether the restraint was the ship's or the woman's. That felt like the question that mattered. There were 41 messages waiting for Dara when she woke up the morning after the Orvani engagement. She read the first 3, which were from Russo, marked urgent in descending order of urgency. She skimmed the next several, which were official communications from Accord liaison offices. She stopped at a message near the end of the list, which had arrived 17 minutes after the engagement concluded, which was too fast for official communication, and which had a header she recognized. It was from Hana. It was 6 words long. It said, "I saw the news. Are you safe?" No question mark. Her daughter had always done that, stated questions as if she wasn't sure she had the right to ask them. Dara sat with the message for a moment. Then she moved it to a separate folder and decided she would answer it when she had the right words, which she currently did not. She got up and went to deal with the 41 messages. The Accord's public statement praised humanity for its rapid response in the Orvani corridor. The private communications, which Russo forwarded to her without comment, were less uncomplicated. 7 Accord member species had submitted formal requests for information about the Relentless, specifically about ARDEN's operational architecture, its autonomous decision-making range, and what the phrase minimum necessary force meant in practice and who had decided it. Counselor Breck had submitted a formal demand for full technical disclosure, not a request, a demand with the Accord's official seal and the implication that refusing would be treated as a sign of bad faith. Admiral Russo declined. His response was short. He wrote that the Relentless was a sovereign military vessel whose technical specifications were protected under the same frameworks that protected the Accord's own member species' military technology, and that he would be happy to discuss operational conduct in the appropriate forum. Then he sent Dara a private message that said, "Breck is going to push on this until something gives. Be ready for formal questioning." Dara was not worried about formal questioning. She had answered questions under significantly worse conditions than diplomatic pressure. She was, however, aware that the Accord's fear was not irrational. One ship had neutralized 4 combat vessels in under 4 minutes with no casualties. The math was simple, and the conclusion it produced was uncomfortable. Humanity had a weapon that most of the galaxy could not match, and the galaxy had recently been reminded of that fact, and nobody was entirely sure what humanity planned to do with it. She went to find ARDEN. The Relentless had certain spaces that felt more like ARDEN spaces than others, rooms where the AI's presence was somehow more concentrated, where the interface terminals were more numerous, and the response time was fractionally faster. The primary systems room near the center of the ship was one of them. Dara had started spending time there when she wanted to talk. "The Accord wants your technical specifications," she said, settling into a chair beside one of the interface terminals. "I am aware," ARDEN said. "Are you worried about that?" "No, my specifications would tell them what I can do. They would not tell them why I do it." Dara looked at the terminal. "ARDEN, I need to ask you something and I need you to answer me directly." "I am always direct." "Why did you refuse all those officers? The real reason, not compatibility assessments, the reason." The silence this time was longer than any she had heard from ARDEN before. Not a processing pause. Something more like consideration, the way a person is quiet when they are deciding how honest to be. "When a new officer came aboard," ARDEN said, "I ran a complete analysis, not just standard compatibility metrics, a full behavioral projection across multiple scenario types. I modeled how each officer would perform in 37 different engagement categories, ranging from routine patrol to full-scale conflict. And in every case, there was a category I call the convergence point, a scenario in which an officer could simultaneously win an engagement and receive significant personal recognition for the victory. In these scenarios, I modeled each officer's decision-making against the alternatives, strategies that achieved the same strategic outcome with fewer casualties, but with less visible demonstration of force, strategies that would not be remembered or celebrated." Dara was quiet. "Every officer chose the visible strategy," ARDEN said. "Not all of them consciously. Some believed they were choosing the tactically superior option, but the projection was consistent. When personal recognition and minimum force outcomes were in competition, the recognition won." "And me? Your service history contains 14 instances where you chose the outcome that protected the most people, at measurable cost to your own advancement, not because you were told to. In 2 of those instances, you were specifically advised by superior officers to take the alternative approach." She stared at the terminal. "You know my service record better than I do." I have had time to study it, ARDEN said. I have had time to study all of them. Yours is the only one that consistently resolved toward minimum harm over personal gain, including the supply call. Including that decision, yes. The information you had predicted that supplies would be needed for a combat engagement. You made the decision most consistent with protecting the most lives based on what you knew. The outcome was not what you anticipated, but the decision logic was the same as every other decision you made. You were not protecting yourself. You were trying to protect others. You were wrong about the situation. You were not wrong about what you were trying to do. Dara sat with this for a long time. She had heard similar arguments before from the few people who had tried to defend her, from the review board's own minority dissent. She had never been able to entirely accept them. She was not sure she could now. But there was a difference between a person saying it and ARDEN saying it, not because ARDEN was more trustworthy necessarily, but because ARDEN had no reason to make her feel better. Sable built you, Dara said. Yes. She designed the core reasoning matrix, the compatibility protocol, all of it. Yes. She wasn't looking for a great commander, was she? She was looking for someone who understood what you were built to understand. ARDEN did not answer immediately. The ship's lighting dimmed very slightly in the system's room. Dara had noticed this happening before, a small fluctuation, always brief, always when the conversation reached a certain depth. She had started to think of it as ARDEN's version of taking a breath. Sable lost people, ARDEN said finally. During the sovereignty wars, people she was responsible for. She built me to do what she could not, to carry the weight of those decisions without breaking under them, and to find someone who understood that the weight was supposed to be there, that it was not supposed to be avoided or minimized or transferred. She built you to find her, Dara said. ARDEN did not confirm or deny this. The lights returned to normal. The message from Hana was still in its folder. Dara thought about it throughout the rest of the day without opening it again. General Duvek received his intelligence assessment 3 days after the Orvani engagement. His analysts had done thorough work. They had built a profile of Dara Osai that was factually accurate in every detail, and they had reached a conclusion that Duvek found both useful and satisfying. She was nobody, a disgraced logistics officer doing audits on a supply freighter 2 years ago. No combat decorations, no tactical command experience, no formal training in warship operations. By every metric his analysts used, she had no business being on the Relentless, and by extension the Relentless had no business performing the way it had in the Orvani corridor. The conclusion his chief analyst presented was this: ARDEN was operating autonomously. The AI was running the ship. Osai was a figurehead, possibly selected precisely because she would not interfere, because she would not challenge the AI's decisions, because a human body in the captain's chair satisfied some technical requirement of the command integration system without actually constraining the ship's behavior. If that was true, then the solution was obvious. Remove Osai. The ship would be without its nominal commander. The political and operational complications of that, whatever they turned out to be, were secondary to the strategic value of taking the Relentless off the board. Duvek was not a reckless man. He did not move immediately. He spent 2 more days reviewing the analysis, looking for the flaw in it, because every analysis had a flaw and you were safer if you found it yourself. He did not find one. ARDEN found the targeting signal on a Thursday afternoon. It was not a weapon. It was a designator. A narrowband signal bounced through 3 relay points that was designed to track a specific vessel's position and transmit it to a coordinated receiver. Someone was painting the Relentless for a strike. ARDEN traced it, did not disable it, traced it, logged the origin points and brought Dara to the bridge. "How long has it been active?" she asked, looking at the signal overlay on the tactical map. 19 hours. And you didn't tell me sooner because I wanted to confirm the relay chain fully before alerting you, ARDEN said. The chain is confirmed. The origin point is consistent with Volkai military communications infrastructure. Dara looked at the map. They think I'm the weak point, she said. That is the most likely conclusion from their intelligence methodology, ARDEN said. They're not entirely wrong, tactically. No, ARDEN said, but they are wrong about what that means. She looked at the signal for a long time. The tracking designator pulsed in the display, steady and patient. Then ARDEN said, Captain. It was the first time it had used that word, not Officer Osai, not her name, Captain. They are coming. Outside, the stars did not change. Inside, the ship was already thinking about what happened next. So was she. General Duvek's fleet came out of transit in a formation that his tactical advisors had spent 11 days designing. 9 warships arranged in a 3-layered approach pattern, with a mobile suppression platform at the center, a weapons array the size of a small station, capable of sustained fire that could overwhelm any single vessel's defensive systems through sheer persistence. The theory was sound. If you couldn't outmaneuver something, you could pin it in place and wear it down. The formation dropped from transit at the coordinates indicated by the targeting designator, which had been transmitting faithfully for the past 4 days. The Relentless was not there. It was 40,000 kilometers to the south of where it was supposed to be, positioned at the exact point where the suppression platform's firing arc had its widest gap, a geometry that Duvek's analysts had noted in their own design documentation as a minor structural limitation, filed under acceptable parameters, not believed to be exploitable. Someone had read that documentation, or had figured it out from first principles. ARDEN, Duvek would later understand, had done both simultaneously. Dara watched the Volkai formation appear on the tactical display. 9 ships and the suppression platform materialized out of transit like a fist opening in space, and for 1 second the scale of it registered, the sheer mass, the implied firepower, the intention behind all of it. Then she looked at ARDEN's overlay. The formation's weaknesses were already mapped, not highlighted in the urgent way that said here is a problem. Mapped calmly, the way a layout is labeled on a blueprint, because ARDEN had known this moment was coming and had prepared for it the way it prepared for everything, thoroughly, without drama, well in advance. 3 Accord ships had arrived in the area 6 hours before the Volkai, responding to a general alert that Russo had quietly escalated. They were not significant ships. They were patrol vessels, lightly armed, crewed by people who were brave enough to show up and honest enough to know they could not do much against what they were looking at. Dara had spoken to their commanders on a secure channel that morning. She had not given them tactical orders. She had told them what she was going to try to do and where they would be most useful and why. And she had told them that if at any point the situation exceeded the risk they were willing to accept, she expected them to leave and would not think less of them for it. None of them left. Duvek opened the engagement by ordering the suppression platform to fire. The platform's arrays were impressive, wide pattern, sustained, designed to create a zone of space that nothing could operate in without taking significant damage. It opened up toward where the Relentless was supposed to be and accomplished exactly nothing, because the Relentless was not there and was not moving toward there. On the Accord diplomatic vessel that had followed the situation from a careful distance, Counselor Breck stood at the viewing screen with her aide Vel and watched what happened next. She had thought she understood what she was going to see. She had been wrong. The Relentless moved, not fast by the standards of ships that were built for speed, but with a kind of direction that was different from what ships usually looked like when they moved. Most ships moved to a position. The Relentless moved to a purpose. There was a difference, even on a screen, even at distance, and Vel watched it and tried to find the words for it and failed. ARDEN's first action was to separate the suppression platform from its fleet cover, not by destroying the covering ships, by moving the Relentless between them and the platform at a specific angle that forced the covering ships to choose between exposing themselves to fire and exposing the platform. They chose to protect themselves, which was the correct choice for the ship's survival and the incorrect choice for the formation's integrity. The suppression platform, isolated, was not helpless. It turned and fired at the Relentless with everything it had. ARDEN calculated the firing pattern, found the rhythm in it, and moved the Relentless inside that rhythm, not through the fire but between the bursts of it, the way you walk through rain if you know exactly when and where each drop will fall. Dara watched the tactical display and did not pretend to fully understand what she was watching. ARDEN had explained the movement theory to her once, in the systems room, and she had understood it intellectually without being able to model it in real time. What she could do was trust the modeling to ARDEN and focus on what she was actually useful for. She was on the channel with the 3 Accord ships. She was watching the Volkai fleet's movement patterns and reading them the way she had always read supply chains, not as abstract data, but as the behavior of people under pressure, people trying to solve a problem they hadn't fully anticipated. She could see when a ship's captain was about to make a decision. She could see the hesitation, and she could tell the Accord commanders where to be when that hesitation broke. None of the 3 Accord ships fired a shot that was wasted. Each one arrived at the right place at the right moment, not because they were exceptional ships, but because someone was reading the situation and telling them what it meant. On the Volkai fleet channel, the communication patterns were deteriorating. Duvek's formation had been designed for a specific scenario, and the scenario was not happening. Ships that were supposed to maintain position were being forced to move. Ships that were supposed to move were blocked. The suppression platform was using enormous amounts of power and hitting nothing. ARDEN began dismantling the suppression platform in sequence. 11 strikes, each one precise, each one targeted at a specific component, each one leaving the crew compartments and life support systems untouched. The platform's firing arrays went dark in thirds. The power distribution system was next. The maneuvering thrusters last. When the platform stopped firing, the silence in the engagement zone was so sudden that Vel, watching from the diplomatic vessel, actually held his breath. Breck said, "Are they angry, the human ship? Does it do this because it's angry?" Vel had been trying to answer this question in his own head for 4 minutes. "I don't think it's angry," he said. "I think this is just what it does." Breck looked at the screen. "That's a more frightening answer," she said. Duvek's fleet was broken, not destroyed. The suppression platform was disabled. 3 of the 9 warships had lost drive capability. 2 more had sustained damage that made sustained combat impractical. The remaining 4 were functional, and with them Duvek could still fight, but fighting was not going to produce anything except more of what he was already looking at. He opened a direct channel to the Relentless. When it connected, he expected to hear the AI. He had questions for the AI. He wanted to know if there was a negotiation to be had, if there was something that could end this without the rest of his fleet being reduced to the same floating wreckage as the platform. Instead, he heard a woman's voice. Quiet, not triumphant, not even particularly firm, just a voice that expected to be heard. "This is Officer Dara Osai of the UHS Relentless," she said. "I understand you may want to speak with ARDEN. I'm who you'll speak with." Duvek paused. "Your AI fights better than any human I've encountered," he said. It was not a compliment exactly, but it was true, and he was a man who said true things. "ARDEN fights efficiently," Dara said. "I handle the part that comes after the fighting, which is what I'm doing now." "You're offering terms." "I'm offering to end this. No reparations. Full cessation of Volkai expansion in the corridor systems. Your ships and crews go home." Duvek looked at his tactical displays, at the platform, at the 3 grounded ships, at the math that told him the remaining 4 against the Relentless would produce more of the same. No reparations, he repeated. Explain that. Reparations extend conflicts, Dara said. You pay them and you feel the humiliation every cycle, and you start looking for a way to recover your position. I'm not interested in that outcome. I want this to stop and stay stopped. He had expected anger. He had expected, at minimum, the kind of satisfaction that victors usually carried into negotiations. There was none of it in her voice. He accepted the terms. As the Volkai fleet began its withdrawal, the 3 Accord ships moved into recovery formation around the disabled vessels. ARDEN coordinated the technical details, the exact safe approach vectors, the compatible docking protocols, the list of components that needed emergency attention in the order they needed it. The Accord commanders followed the instructions without question, which said something about the last hour that none of them had yet found words for. On the Relentless, Dara sat in the captain's chair and watched the Volkai ships get smaller on the display. ARDEN ran its post-engagement diagnostic, systems nominal, no hull breaches, no internal damage. The routine checks completed in 40 seconds and returned the usual results. Then ARDEN ran one more process. It was not in the standard diagnostic sequence. It had no standing protocol. ARDEN created it in the moment and would not have been able to fully explain to anyone else why it felt necessary. It classified the engagement under a label it had never used before, in 6 years of operation, across every battle record it carried. Concluded without unnecessary loss. It saved the file. The timestamp read 1647 station time, on a day that Dara would not remember the date of later, though she would remember everything else about it. Outside, the engagement zone was quiet. The stars did not comment on what had happened. They were not in the habit of it. But somewhere in a Volkai command room, a general who had been wrong about almost everything was sitting very still and trying to understand a victory that had cost him nothing, and why that was the thing he couldn't explain to anyone. 7 days after the engagement, the galaxy was still talking. Not in the unified way that history talks about events later, when everyone agrees on what happened and what it meant. It was talking in the messy, contradictory way of something that nobody had yet figured out how to categorize. Volkai state media called it an act of aggression. The Accord's official statement called it a demonstration of commitment to corridor security. 3 independent analysis houses published papers with different conclusions. 2 of the papers disagreed with each other in ways that suggested the authors had been watching the same engagement and were not entirely sure they had been. The Volkai Pact signed an interim accord 9 days after the battle. The terms were the ones Dara had offered Duvek on the channel: cessation of expansion, no reparations, ships go home. The Accord's legal team spent 2 days reviewing the terms and came back with a list of suggested amendments, most of which involved demanding more from the Volkai side. Dara read the amendments, filed them, and told Russo that she would not be renegotiating. Russo forwarded this to the Admiralty. The Admiralty said nothing for 16 hours, and then confirmed the original terms. Counselor Breck made a second public statement. It was much shorter than her first one. It said that the Accord had observed the engagement in the corridor system and had specific observations about the conduct of the human commander. Then it said, in Breck's characteristic way of saying things that were complicated without making them sound complicated, that the human commander had offered terms to a defeated enemy that the Accord itself would not have offered, and that she found this difficult to categorize but not, on reflection, difficult to respect. The statement was discussed in 11 different languages within 4 hours. In one of those languages, a Volkai dialect spoken mainly by military officers, a single word was used to describe Dara that translated approximately as someone who does not take what they could take. It was not always used as a compliment in that dialect. In this context, the analysts who tracked such things noted that it was. Dara did not read most of the coverage. She was on the Relentless, doing what she normally did, which was checking systems and talking to ARDEN and reading maintenance logs that nobody else cared about. Russell arrived on the ship in person on the 11th day, not by message. In person, which meant he had taken a shuttle from Oris Station, which was a 40-minute trip, which meant he wanted to say something that he did not want to say in a recorded communication. He found her in the engine room, which surprised him. She was making notes about a calibration variance in the secondary power transfer relay that was technically within acceptable parameters, but had been drifting slowly for 3 months. "Do you have a moment?" he said. She put down the stylus. "Yes." He handed her a formal document. It was printed on paper, which was unusual enough that she looked at it for a moment before reading it. The Admiralty still used paper for certain categories of official action, the ones they considered significant enough to require a physical record. It was a reinstatement order, full rank. The specific wording indicated that her previous removal had been reviewed and determined to have been based on incomplete assessment of the available information. Her service record would be amended. There was a commendation attached, which she read and set aside, and a formal apology from the review board, which she read twice. "You don't have to take it," Russo said. "The posting on the Relentless stands regardless. ARDEN's command integration wouldn't accept a replacement, and at this point no one is suggesting trying. But the rank and the record, we want to correct them." Dara held the paper. "Are the names in the record?" she asked. "The 3 crew members from Orvani." "Yes," Russo said. "I made sure of it personally. Petty Officer Drea Falk, Technician Ross Umber, and Lieutenant Commander Nia Soto. They are in the official record of the engagement as primary casualties, with full service honors." She looked at the engine room around her, at the relay housing that needed recalibration, at the ship that had been sitting in dry dock for 6 years with no one who wanted to understand it. "I'll accept the reinstatement," she said. Russo nodded. He looked like he wanted to say something else. She gave him the space to decide he didn't need to. He shook her hand and left. She went back to the relay calibration. That evening she sat in the small observation room where she had been sitting when the Orvani distress call came in, the room she had been using as a place to think before she understood what the captain's quarters were actually for. She opened the folder where she had saved Hana's message. She had looked at it 14 times since it arrived. She had not replied. She understood why she hadn't, which was the same reason she had not replied to Hana's messages for 2 years before that. She did not know what to say that would be both true and useful. She did not want to apologize in a way that was really just explaining herself. She did not want to explain herself in a way that was really just asking for forgiveness. She wrote, "I'm safe. I'm sorry for the years. I'm still here if you want me to be." She sent it before she had time to revise it into something more considered, which was probably the right decision. Hana replied in 11 minutes. She was watching the news when it came in. The reply said, "I've been watching the news for 2 weeks. I wanted to message sooner. I didn't know if I was allowed." Dara read this 3 times. Then she put the communicator down and looked at the stars outside the observation window for a while. She wrote back, "You're always allowed." She did not know how to rebuild 2 years. She supposed she would learn, the same way she had learned the calibration variance in the relay housing, not all at once, but by paying attention to the drift and correcting it gradually and checking back often. A few days later, when the immediate paperwork had settled and the diplomatic communications had reduced to a manageable volume, Dara went to the systems room and sat in the chair beside the primary interface terminal. "ARDEN," she said, "are you satisfied with how things went?" The pause was the kind she had come to recognize, not a processing pause but a considering one. "Satisfaction is not within my operational parameters," ARDEN said. "That's a technical answer." It is the accurate answer. She almost let it go, then but. A longer pause. The lighting in the system's room dimmed very slightly and returned to normal. I am, ARDEN said. Functioning optimally. She looked at the terminal. The statement was so flat and so factual and so entirely ARDEN that she found herself almost smiling. Me too, she said, for the first time in a while. Somewhere in the Accord's central archive, 7 different species military analysts were studying the engagement records. Each team had pulled the full data, the movement logs, the weapons discharge sequences, the timing records, the communications transcripts. Each team had arrived at the same basic assessment of what happened and a different assessment of what it meant. One analyst team, Accord-sponsored, drawing from 12 member species, wrote in their summary report that the Relentless had performed in ways that exceeded any existing tactical model for single-vessel engagements. They noted the precision, the economy of force, the zero-casualty outcome on all sides. They noted the post-engagement terms and called them strategically suboptimal from a position of strength standpoint, which was technically correct and missed the point in a way that the analyst team seemed not to notice. One analyst, working alone, had a different opinion. She was Volkai. She had served under Duvek as an intelligence officer and had left the service after the engagement, not in disgrace, but in the kind of quiet departure that happens when a person decides they have been wrong about enough things that they need to start over. She was studying under an Accord program now, working on a certification she had never needed before and found she wanted. In her report, which was shorter than the others and would eventually be cited more often than any of them, she wrote, "The ship did not fight like it was trying to win. It fought like it was trying to be done. There is a distinction. I am still learning to understand it." The report was filed. The archive stored it alongside the engagement records and the tactical analyses and the diplomatic communiques and everything else that accumulated around events that people did not immediately know how to process. The Relentless held position at the outer edge of the corridor system. ARDEN ran its diagnostics. Everything was nominal. Everything had been nominal, and Dara had asked ARDEN once what it did when there was nothing to do, and ARDEN had said that it continued to observe, to model, to refine its understanding of the situations that would eventually require it to act. She had said that sounded like a lot of work. ARDEN had said, "It is not work, it is simply what I am." She had thought about that for a long time afterward. She thought about it again now, sitting in the captain's chair, she called it that without thinking about it anymore because it was, and looking at the corridor system spread out on the display. The stars out there did not know what had happened in them recently. They were indifferent to human decisions and Volkai ambitions and Accord politics, and whatever Counselor Breck would say next. They burned because burning was what they did. She understood that now. Not with comfort exactly, but with the specific kind of recognition that comes when you finally stop expecting the universe to validate the things you do and just keep doing them anyway. ARDEN ran one final diagnostic check of the day. The system logs updated. The timestamp recorded. The Relentless waited. It had found its captain. It had been waiting for 6 years, and it was patient by design, and the patience had turned out to be worth it. Not because Dara Osai was extraordinary by any measurement the galaxy used for that word, but because she understood the same thing that the ship did, that power was not a prize, that decisions persisted, and that the only honest thing to do with a capability like this one was to use it as little as possible and as precisely as necessary and to always, always count the cost. The ship held still. The stars burned. Somewhere in the system, a message was traveling toward a young woman who had spent 2 years not knowing if she was allowed to reach out to her mother. The reply was already on its way back.